Hi, I'm Dr. Petra, and we're exploring the metaphysical interpretation of the Bible. And we're starting with the Hebrew Bible, and we're going to work with the Genesis 2nd creation story. If you don't know, there are actually two creation stories, and we've already done a video on the first creation story. So this one is the second one, which is actually probably much older. It was, of course, also spoken as an oral tradition. But whereas the first creation story is interested in the cosmology, it's interested in creation itself. How did creation happen? How did all of this get to be here? This creation story is much more interested in the human condition. Basically, quite frankly, why is life so hard? Why is it that women die in childbirth? Why is it that it's a struggle to get food out of the ground? Why is it that it feels like life is so hard when each and every one of us has an innate inner awareness of this idea that at some point life was easy and beautiful and all of our needs were met? So we're going to lay down the story. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at how this can be understood as a developmental process. And then we're ultimately going to take our metaphysical interpretation to it and really understand that there is a deep and profound truth about the evolution of consciousness being revealed here. So we're going to kind of lay the story down 3 times in 3 slightly different ways so that we can take a look at it. Okay, so here we go. So this story begins that God had created the heavens and earth, but there wasn't anything going on. Nothing had grown yet, nothing was happening yet, and a mist came up over the ground. And the very first thing in this story that God does is create Adam, A-D-H-A-M. We think of Adam as the name of a man. It is actually a Hebrew term that means human or humankind. So God created Adam. And how did God create Adam? Well, God created Adam by taking dust and breathing life into the dust. So if you reflect back on the first creation story, Genesis' first creation story, there might be something there to notice. Where did the dust come from? Well, of course, we have heaven and earth that are not yet populated in any way, and that unformed breath. So anyway, Adam is created, and God creates a paradise for Adam to live in. God creates this paradise. We call it Eden. Eden does, of course, mean paradise. And all of Adam's needs are met. The water is flowing, and all the plants are growing, and anything that he could possibly want to eat is available, and it's all beautiful and wonderful. Until it seems that Adam gets a little bored. And God says, well, Adam can't be in this place all by himself. We have to do something about that. And so all of the animals are created. And every animal is brought to Adam, and Adam names the animal, and it's all really, great, and it's lovely. And so now we have this Eden that is populated with animals. And Adam still doesn't have anybody to talk to or play with. So God says, well, you need to have somebody more of your kind, right? Causes Adam to sleep, takes the rib out of Adam's side, and creates his helpmate Eve. So here we are, Eden. We have Eden that has been created, this beautiful paradise where all the needs are met, everything is beautiful, everything is wonderful, and we have Adam and Eve in the beautiful garden. And it even talks about that they walk and talk unashamedly with God, completely free in the garden, completely one with the garden and with God, and utterly unconscious about themselves. Just everything is bliss and beauty and ecstasy. So the only caveat is God says there's a tree, Adam and Eve, you can't eat from, right? So this is what they can't eat is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Anything else they can do? Well, you know how the story goes, right? Human curiosity. Adam and Eve are out wandering around. Eve kind of is so interested in this tree. And who's there but the serpent? The serpent is there. We have the serpent. And the serpent says, surely you want to eat of this tree. Why would God not let you to eat of this tree? And Eve says, well, we were told that if we eat of this tree, of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we will surely die. And the serpent says, ha, you're being fooled. Oh, no. It's not that you will die. It's that you will become like gods. You will become like gods. Okay, so let's just stop here for a minute. So Adam and Eve being the in Eden, right? They're in that unconscious experience of oneness. They're utterly in bliss and ecstasy. They think nothing of the fact that they are utterly in available to the divine presence, and the divine presence is available to them. Now, look, interestingly enough, this fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? What is good and evil but the fundamental pair of opposites? It's either good or it's not good, right? We call not good evil. In the Hindu tradition, the understanding of the physical universe, the understanding of the physical universe is that its fundamental reality is the pairs of opposites. That in the spiritual absolute reality, there's only oneness. There's only wholeness. But for oneness and wholeness to be expressed, it's expressed through creation. And the moment you have creation, you have the pair of opposites, space and time, the fundamental pair of opposites. And so we just want to note this process. We just want to note this. The knowledge of the pairs of opposites. Okay, let's stop at the serpent. Oh, and that you'll die. And that you'll die. One might have to ask, what needs to die here? What would die here if you were to understand the nature of the pairs of opposites? So the serpent. So one of the things we have to remember is that the Hebrews were the indigenous people of Canaan. They were swept out of Canaan. They came back, right? And they were surrounded in the very earliest days, they were surrounded by the matriarchal fertility, also indigenous spiritualities. And in the matriarchal spiritualities, the highest revered animal is the serpent. Why? Because having no legs, the serpent is the closest to the ground. Walks on slithers on the belly of the mother, and is considered the wisest of all animals, and was a deep and profound totem, if you so will, for these fertility spiritualities. We can just fast forward and note that the whole idea of every seed is sacred. You can't cast your seed out onto the ground, right? And all of that's in the Christian tradition, right? All comes from the same thing. In these fertility rites, this is where the king was chosen for the day, and with the high priestess would go out, make love on the field, and at the last minute pull out and have the seed go into the ground as a way of blessing the ground with fertility. So what do you do if you want to keep your group together and you don't want them to go play with the temple priestesses, and you don't want them to do all of those other rites over there because we're us, and we by God are going to keep us and be safe? What do? Well, you make whatever is sacred to that other out there, you make it evil. So you co-opt the serpent and you make it evil. So hence the serpent. Now, what does the serpent say? You will become like gods. So here, the threat is you'll die. And here, the promise is you'll become like gods. So We're not going to forget this. This is very important. So what happens? Eve goes, oh, looks like pretty good fruit. You should try some, the serpent says, right? And back and forth. And so Eve eats of the fruit, right? So Eve eats, and then she gives it to Adam, and Adam eats. They eat of the fruit. And what happens? Well, oopsie. What happens? It's very important. What happens is they discover they're naked. They discover their nakedness. And because they discover their nakedness, they're ashamed and they hide. They hide behind the tree and they sew up some kind of a leaf covering to cover themselves. God shows up for the evening stroll about the garden and is like, well, Adam and Eve, where are you? Well, they try to hide. We're here. We're naked. We're ashamed. We're hiding. And God says, well, who told you that? And of course, there's the recognition that they've eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Because what is nakedness but the opposite of being unconscious of being naked? Being ashamed of being naked is just the opposite of being unconscious of being naked. And so in this discovery of their nakedness, right, and the press of God, of course we know what happens. What happens? Adam says, she made me do it. She made me do it. And Eve says, the serpent made me do it. Okay, personally, I think this is one of the most touching human moments in this whole story. Really? You've never done this? You've never tried to, like, especially as a kid? Well, she made me do it. Well, he made me do it. Well, the devil made me do it. Well, my trauma made me do it. My false beliefs made me do it, right? We can find all kinds of things that we would rather blame than simply take responsibility. So this is right here, the most human moment in this whole experience, right? This very human moment, which is something really interesting to notice, that it's this far into the story that we get a very human moment. So what happens out of this, of course, is, well, first God curses the serpent. Well, we already know why God curses the serpent, right? To make all that other stuff wrong so we can all be nice Hebrews and stay safe in our, but more importantly, we get kicked out. We get kicked out, and we now have the, we now have the human condition. We have the human condition. And what is that human condition? But pain and suffering. Okay. So let's go back. Let's go back in this story. What we can see here, if you lay over this, all the psychological work that's been done with the development of the understanding of the developmental process, right? Starts with the idea of evolution, moves through to the idea of the evolution of an individual human, the development of human consciousness in an individual. We all start out in Eden. We all start out in our mother's womb. We all, when we're born, in the first 9 months of being born, a baby doesn't actually know the difference between themselves and the bodies of the people who care for the child. They can't tell the difference. And so they're in a complete unconscious oneness in their family, with their caregivers, with their parents, and they're given everything they need. All their needs are taken care of. And then they hit the terrible twos. What happens in the terrible twos? Mine, 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 mine. Or no, 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 right? These two acts are fundamental to the development of a healthy individual. What's happening is the very first revelation of the pairs of opposites, self and not self, self and not self. Right? Which up until that point, its baby and mom's body are essentially the same. And everything is a part of everything else. In the first development is the pairs of opposites, self and not self. Now, what happens in this moment of self and not self, the serpent said, if you will eat this, you will become like gods. And what is it that that gods have, or what is it that the child has in that moment of being able to see the pairs of opposites? This is the birth of choice. Right here. This is the birth of choice. The ability to choose, to make choices, is one of the things that fundamentally separates out self-awareness, self-consciousness. And without the birth of a self, which is not anything else out there, without a birth of the self, there's no self to make a choice. There's no conscious awareness of making choices. And so in this process, when we eat of the fruit of this knowledge, becoming like gods, we activate, we own our ability, we begin to own our ability to choose, that we actually have the capability of choosing God or not God, self or not self, good or evil. Without the ability to choose, we can't actually move out of the unconscious oneness into conscious oneness, into a desire for oneness and a life that seeks that oneness. All right, and so what happens is out of this choice, right, out of this emergence of self, we would call this here, this is the, let's make this a little different color so we can see it, right? This is the emergence of the self. Because what else does nakedness and being ashamed of nakedness imply but self-consciousness, right? Self-consciousness in its negative. I'm self-conscious of myself, right? I'm conscious of the fact that you can see me, right? But you can only see me because I'm not one with everything. I actually stand out. And so this is the emergence of the self. Hence, our most human experience, because we are now experiencing ourself as separate. And what does the science of mind say? But ourself as separate is a sense of separation from oneness, right? A sense of separation, which is, in fact, our human condition, right? And so we're beginning to see the advent of the human condition here as this sense of separation. Oh my gosh, I'm not part of Eden anymore. I feel myself as separate, as different, and that sense of separation is the experience of being kicked out. Do you see what I'm saying? We're not kicked out because we've done this. We feel kicked out as the revelation of our sense of separation. And we become locked into our human condition. And our human condition does not necessarily access choice consciously. Our human condition does not necessarily access choice consciously. We make then unconscious choices. And we're locked into this idea of pain and suffering, right? We're just playing out the patterns and habits of our life. Okay. So we can see that this is the developmental process of the individual human being. This is also a recognition of the developmental process of consciousness itself. This consciousness is unconscious of itself. This is undifferentiated oneness, unconscious oneness. The sense of separation actually is not a problem. We think of it as a problem, like, oh my God, it's the problem, it's the root of all problems. The sense of separation is actually required for self to reveal itself. And so the Romantic poets, I'm running out of different colors, the Romantic poets, they call this whole thing right here, they call it the fortunate fall. In the science of mind, we say it's necessary. This is not a fall at all. This is not a fall from grace. This is not there's no sin in this. There's no punishment in this. This is the developmental process. This is the developmental process of consciousness itself to fully engage in the human condition. And what is the whole point of Earth School? To learn about how to exercise your choice. The entire point of Earth School is, what are you choosing? Good or evil? Which we might say, alignment with life or not. I like to think of it as, I'm either choosing the light or not. This is the fundamental choice here, right? When we use the old-fashioned words good and evil, but it's really, am I choosing to live in alignment with life, or am I just deciding to randomly do whatever my humanness wants, either to avoid pain, avoid suffering, cause pain and cause suffering because I'm in pain and suffering, right? So our kicked out of the Garden of Eden, this is actually necessary. It's necessary and required. Now, the most amazing thing of all of this is that the entire rest of the biblical story, all the rest of the biblical stories as we go through all of the Hebrew writings and Daniel and Job and Sarah and Abraham and all of this and all of these stories, each one of them examines what happens when you choose God, or what happens when you don't, when you choose your own, we'll call it our own egoic need, right? Or you simply don't choose, and you watch automatic patterns being played out, and you can and every story is taking us closer and closer and closer and closer. And of course, what's the denouement of the story? The denouement of the story is Jesus the Christ. What does Jesus the Christ say? He says, the Father and I are one. What does Jesus portray for us? Conscious oneness. Somebody who chooses unequivocally always to live from oneness. But now that oneness is a choice. It's not the unconscious oneness of Adam and Eve. It's the conscious oneness of saying, I have seen and learned and grown through the consequences of all of the choices that I've made, all of the ways in which I've explored the things that I choose that I think make me happy, that I think keep me from being in pain, that I think mask the suffering, all of those choices that don't work, and then I start choosing things that do work until I recognize that I and the Father are one. I've always lived in Eden. All my good is always already here, but I have to choose it. So this fall isn't a fall at all. It is necessary for consciousness. This is actually consciousness awakening. And aren't you glad that you woke up?